And now all of the integration of all of the different systems we've heard about goes into EarthRanger in many parks. We now need to recognize it as the operation of the park, all elements of the departments that now require that information, and all tiers of management of the mandated organization who is looking after the protected area, whether it is a private reserve or it is a government-run reserve, what that information is for, and it is only as useful as how it is used. So when you look at the information we receive, we have different departments now needing it, whether it's tourism, veterinary responses, the community conservation guys looking after problem animal control and human-wildlife conflict, or of course law enforcement, and there are other departments too. They all have an information need. And at the same time, everyone who is working in that park is working within an organized system. A sector commander must report to a warden in charge of their sector or their department. It could be a sector commander's reporting in law enforcement. So the warden in charge of law enforcement needs a report from him. And the same report, but a different degree of detail, will be necessary to be passed on to the chief warden, and the chief warden to the director of operations to the executive director, and probably up to a minister. Now, most of that information, irrespective of the department, is predictable. If you wish, you could call it 80% of that is predictable, and therefore you can plan those reports. And every single tier will be doing a monthly, quarterly, annual report. One of the problems we have is a lot of the wardens at different departments are not in any way or form trained to carry out analytics or to do the GIS work. So we have an ongoing issue of the quality and sustained standard, even how things are presented to every level of management. And as you go up, the decision makers are trying to make annual operation plans, trying to improve the way they're doing things. And so we have to understand EarthRanger is now a much greater beast than it once was. The requirements, in my view, fall into three buckets. The first one is governance and compliance. Like I've just been saying, everyone has to report to somebody, and it all filters into general management plans, annual operation plans, etc. The second one is more operational management and strategic planning. That may be where is the research elements and the external groups also fit in. But it could be a particular of interest, like let's say there's an anthrax outbreak, and you need to review it carefully. The one that we know we're good at is the real-time management. And at that point, we have what EarthRanger is brilliant at so far. But what we have to really focus on is the flow of that information, automating it, and make sure it's not only good quality, but efficient and effective. And that is the key to what we are looking at right now. The critical path for us is making sure that we can automate that information to the user's requirement. And it is a lot of information now. Leadership is inundated with administration. Wardens, and I'm sure there are some in this room too, have 80–90% of their time sat behind a desk trying to be compliant. One of our greatest problems in many of these protected areas is not having time to lead our teams and solve the problems that we are mandated to do. We are simply trying to automate, well, not even automate, we're trying to look after the compliance. So we have got to focus on making sure we understand what we're presenting, to whom and why, and making sure that as it goes through that chain of command, the detail is provided to the level required. An executive director will not need to see the various sector commanders' details, but it is easily predictable to be able to save them at least 30–40% of the time available. And I think everybody here would probably have the same issues, in as much as we don't have as much resource, manpower that we require. So the effort that we're going to at the moment is very much trying to organize this information, identify exactly what is needed where, and what the decision makers at every level are wanting. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, we got one more speaker, Jelle from Rewilding Europe. As Jess mentioned earlier, they've just opened up their 10th new site. And I think 5 so far are using EarthRanger. 6. Thanks, Jelle.
Good morning to you all. Hope you're all well. And super thrilled to be here and see you all and hear about all these great stories and how different users are using the EarthRanger platform. From my side, I can say Rewilding Europe started using EarthRanger quite recently, and I'm also, well, I can't say happy to say, but we are the only one in Europe right now actually using it in Europe. I hope that's going to change soon, because it's such a great platform, and we're learning a lot from it. And I also hope that to speak to all of you about your special use cases. And I think you'll be seeing a little bit of difference from what you're used to. The way we use EarthRanger might be slightly different. I'll just highlight a couple of use cases that we have in throughout Europe. First of all, maybe it helps to understand a little bit more about the strategic approach of Europe and a little bit of the background of Rewilding Europe. So, Rewilding Europe started in 2011 with just a couple of initiatives and areas. So it's a relatively young organization. Right now, like I just mentioned, we just enrolled the 10th area, which is Iberian Highlands, and we went to roll out EarthRanger straight away, because we're lucky, because the team leader was actually using it before in Zambia in relation to African parks. So right now that site is pretty empty, and we're integrating systems right there. But thrilled to see that coming on. Apart from that, there's 5 other sites that we have EarthRanger rolled out, and we have different rewilding approaches in each area and each landscape. For me, it's the humble task to bring it all together and harmonize the data collection and demonstrate the impact of rewilding to these landscapes. And so what we are using as a strategic approach with Rewilding Europe is this so-called rewilding wheel, or with the different goals and objectives that is sort of circling along. And it starts off with creating functional ecosystems that allow species to come back, and habitats to thrive. And so the second one is the actual wildlife comeback, and together they form the wild and nature part of the rewilding practices that we focus on. But that's not the only thing that we do and practice. So next off is also the nature for people goal, which emphasizes more the benefits to people, both on a socio-economic level, as well as wider benefits to climate adaptation and working with communities and coexistence matters. And then also to build more engagement and scaling up the whole of the rewilding movement throughout Europe and the rest of the globe, hopefully. While we create more synergy between practitioners and creating webinars and information sharing and good practices on that. So I'll focus on the functional ecosystems and wildlife comeback a little bit more, because that's basically the core of our work, and when EarthRanger is coming in right now as well. So functional ecosystem speaks to the use of ecological integrity and creating connectivity and complexity in the landscape that enables more resilience of the landscape and species to come back. And the next one is also to work with and work towards natural processes and disturbances to allow for fire to play their key role, flooding, natural grazing, predation, and scavenging, and so on. And lastly, we aim to also reduce the human forcing in the areas, so to reduce artificial feeding or pest control or removal of carrion and all these things. On the wildlife comeback front, we obviously actively introduce but maybe more importantly also we try to enable the natural comeback of wildlife by improving habitats and restore habitats. And I'll also have some examples in the next session, also tomorrow on the end of the day. But also the active reintroduction of species or missing keystone species is done throughout these areas. And lastly, we're looking into innovative approaches on the practical tools that we can put in place. And I'll have an example of that also coming on. It widely speaks to anti-poaching and anti-poisoning units and the support of human-wildlife coexistence and corridors. So the actual need for data and EarthRanger, for that matter, is twofold. We focus on the long-term rewilding impact monitoring. So we have an obligation to prove our success in our areas. So we'd like to be there for the long run and create a baseline and then prove over the years the successes of the different actions in the areas. And the second one is more, aiding the landscapes by providing them an operational platform for alerting and response. And I'll have some one example there as well. So this is the Portuguese team, for example, on the motorbikes that use EarthRanger right now with CyberTracker to report wildfires and snares in the area and a bunch of more reports. Then on example of impact monitoring for wildlife comeback, so that's more of a long-term monitoring approach. So we're quite early in the game now, so we're rolling out systems as we go, and we're also having a monitoring framework developed right now. But one practical example that we use EarthRanger for is the setup of a camera grid to monitor wildlife in a hunting concession in Croatia. And we set up a grid of 53 cameras for the second year now. And EarthRanger is being used to create a report to store different variables on these sites. So both on covariates, on habitat, as well as the situation on the placement of the camera itself. And then we can also track the success and the deployment length and rate of these cameras, and on retrieval, collect additional data on calibrations of the images. So that's one practical example that we use for this monitoring approach, but more is coming on habitat monitoring and all other kinds of stuff. And another practical example of the use of the alerting and response in the human-wildlife contact management is in Romania, where we introduced a herd of bison that is now growing towards a viable population of 150 animals in close proximity to human settlements. So we set up obvious geofencing that will prevent the animals of raiding crops in the nearby villages, and send out reports to the rangers that can then respond to it and intervene where necessary. I'll skip quickly through this example. You'll be giving this example in the next session due to time limitations. I think one nice thing to maybe talk about is getting to the most out of the data topic. So we decided to integrate our systems to use online data, both the reporting and the subject movement to ArcGIS Align platform, both for analysis and dashboarding, as well as for animations and data visualization tools. So I don't think this video is going to run, but it's just an example of visor moving through the landscape. Or does it? Yes. Oh, okay. So, and here's another example of a dashboarding that we set up for Central Apennines based on the. So the good thing is about we basically customized the whole data model to accommodate the needs of the central needs of Rewilding Europe, both, and then local needs of the teams. And we created in such a way that there is overlap between all different kinds of attributes. Now we end up with a central database that can be queried for all kinds of actions and responses. So we can query for certain species and then see how many times that came up in a human-wildlife contact or was hit by a roadkill. And that's very useful and very easy to use for the teams. So very happy on that. Maybe a quick overview of what we are thrilled to see happening in the future with EarthRanger. One is very happy to hear about EarthRanger Mobile. So in functionality, we really like to jump on that and use it, especially for habitat. Classification and monitoring. Another one is on the patrol planning. We hope to have more insights of the efforts of the teams on the ground and actually see the bias of data collection and correct for that with patrol planning. And then on automations, we'd like to have close integrations with satellite imagery, as well as try to find the MCPs for observations, so the minimum convex polygons based on field observations of introduced animals. I've heard the lady from Move Apps talk about cluster analysis, which is super exciting. We have on a number of sites we have vultures going on, and we're interested also to feeding events there and response to that to see if there's any poisoning going on.